This is Speaking of Shakespeare, conversations about things Shakespearean. I'm Thomas Dabbs, broadcasting from Aoyama Gakuin University in central Tokyo. If you are joining us on YouTube, you should know that this program is also available on your favorite podcast platform. This talk is with Tiffany Stern of the Shakespeare Institute, University of Birmingham, located in Stratford-upon-Avon. Tiffany is Deputy Director of Research at the Institute and also Fellow of the British Academy. We will talk about her recent perspectives on ballads in early modern drama, on Edmond Malone's 18th century Shakespeare scholarship, and on her recent editorial work in Shakespeare and in 16th century literature. This talk is funded by the Aoyama Gakuin Information Media Center. This series has been maintained with support from the Aoyama Gakuin Institute of the Humanities and from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for inviting me.
I will tell our audience, we started and I forgot to hit record. This is something, I have a little note on my computer reminding me, but I was so excited to see you that I forgot to do it. Anyhow, it was 2 years ago, 2 years and a couple of months ago that we last talked, and it seems like yesterday, and I can't believe time has passed that quickly. And at that time, your book on rehearsals, you were looking into rehearsing in Shakespeare's time. I have some specific questions even about that book before we finish. But what I want to do is move forward. At that point, we talked about fairgrounds and the relationship between fairgrounds and players and all of this just rich, exciting stuff that comes from the time of Shakespeare and the material elements and the social and the time itself, which is so exciting to me as a cultural historian. And I know Shakespeare is also our contemporary in many ways, but it's so good to see that. I wanted to also move forward to your work on ballads. We started that last time. We're going to look at that in just a moment. I wanted to feature your recent Cambridge Elements publication on Shakespeare and Malone in the 18th century and the problems of chronology. But let's move on to ballads. You have accused our esteemed playwrights, Shakespeare and Johnson, of selling or promoting merch during their productions. And this article that you have recently published, this fascinating article, Ballads and Product Placement in the Time of Shakespeare, is where I'd like to start. And may I ask you to give us a little bit of an overview of ballads and product placement in the time of Shakespeare?
Absolutely. I'm just completing a book on this subject, actually, so I'm very thrilled to get the chance to talk about it. So I became really interested in these pieces of paper. It's a single piece of paper printed on one side, which has the words of a song printed on it. And that's what a ballad was in the early modern period. And I was interested that when you read a play on a page, maybe the play has lots of songs in it, and they all sort of on the page look the same. But some of those songs on the page are actually songs to be circulated on those printed ballad sheets. So I started thinking, how do these relate, the written play and the printed ballad sheet? And as I explored more and more, it became clear that sometimes plays were merchandising those ballads. So I started by looking at that. And then I realized, it's not just that plays are merchandising ballads. Sometimes the playwrights are writing ballads to be merchandised, and they're putting them in their play. And then, so I was they must be selling them round the playhouse. How does this work? And so I started researching how and where ballads were sold, who did that. And it became clear that playhouses had ballad singers and sellers, you sing to sell, around them, entertaining the queue, the line, as they came into the theatre, and then entertaining the queue, the line, as they came out again. And that keeps the people in the queue, sort of makes them behave. But that means that the people queuing are hearing songs from the play in advance or songs from the play afterwards, and that they're buying a song, and that's their memento from their trip to the theatre. And that means that those particular songs that are also sold as ballads, are merchandise. And then I realized, well, of course, in our theatres, we've for a long time, sold in the old days the CD of the music. We often merchandise the music bit separately from the rest of the play. And that's always kind of shrewd marketing, because then you don't release the actual play, but you release a little tempting bit of it, which also then advertises the play to other people. So anyway, I'm writing a book on ballads, not songs, but ballads specifically that are in plays, that it seems are also being sold around plays. And then, just to add to that, it also became clear that there are a lot of ballads that are about plays and that tell their story, and that are kind of synopses or sort of abstracts. And I started to realize those too are being sold in that same place. So that we often think of the play as that bit of dialogue that happens inside the playhouse. But suppose we expand and think of the songs that happen outside the playhouse. And now we've got a bigger context for the play. It's like a wider paratext that's a very musical one. And it means that our plays are always framed by music before and afterwards. And the music often has a strange connection to the play inside. And there's another bit I should add, that at the end of plays, even a play with no ballad, at the end of plays, it was usual for the clown to sing and dance a jig, or sometimes a group of people, but very often the clown. And that jig was a ballad, and it might be for sale out of the playhouse. So I started to realize that this thing is both to do with paratext and text, but it's also kind of to do with the geography of a playhouse. And when does the play begin? And where does the playhouse stop? And all those huge questions. So I'm sorry, that was a massive answer, but it's all in my head at present. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Well, it's impossible for you to go on too much about this, because it's absolutely fascinating. I remember first attending, I don't even want to say the years now, but RSC productions and buying posters for those productions. And some of them were, as I still have a couple of them, they're absolutely lovely with the artists and so forth. And I wanted our audience to know, my students and others, that these are broadsheets or broadsides, large pieces of paper printed on one side. You can fold them up and put them in your pocket if you want to, or you can put them on a wall. You can decorate the pub walls with them, and they are collector's items, and they have these beautiful inscriptions, woodcuts. I'm sorry, woodcuts. A lot of little things going on from the examples that you picked up from that German collection. There's in Munich. You were receiving permissions, and I'm wondering how they got over there. But
yes, well, actually, I mean, for that, that's a book which is also available here in our collections. And I wanted the free version, so I wanted the one that's on Open Commons. So that's what's going on there. But this is a book which has songs in it, and it's published. It's repeatedly published in the 1640s and the 1650s, and it's got songs in it, and it's got song-specific pictures in it, and it came to. I was actually very inspired by an article by a man called J.P. Cutts, I think writing in the 50s, who wrote so brilliantly on music in Shakespeare. And he suggested, and I think he is definitely right, that these songs with pictures are ballads. The songs are ballads that were sold on broadsheets. The pictures were made for those broadsheets. And the broadsheets have not survived, which is very usual. These were very ephemeral texts. But his suggestion is that the shattered bits of broadsheet, the picture and the actual words, have ended up in this book, Recreation for Ingenious Headpieces. And I think he also helped me to think of different ways of looking for ballads. So you can only really write on ballads if you have a gathered field. And one reason why ballad study is quite modern, quite recent, is that only recently have two brilliant websites come about that gather enough of them for you really to have a look at broadsheets collectively. And one is by the Bodleian, it's the Bodleian Library's ballad broadsheet collection. And the other is called EBBA, which is English Broadside Ballad Archive, I think, EBBA. And having these enabled me to see so many ballads that were published and often survive in strange collections, not the general public ones, but often in scrapbooks and other places. But then, with the help of cuts, I realized that there were more ballads to be found shattered, but now inside books. And then there are more which are preserved in manuscript, although they were printed. The print is lost, but sometimes people noted them down. So it's pretty tricky gathering together the information you need. Mm-hmm. But when you do, you start to realize, oh, there's a lot of connection with plays. Mm-hmm. And not only with plays, because ballads were like kind of magazine articles, and you would have a ballad that's on someone being hanged, and you'd have a ballad on a flood, and you'd have a ballad on advice if you want to get married, and you'd have a ballad that's pornographic, and you had sort of everything was covered in ballads. But there's a subset that's kind of play ballads and are being marketed in particular ways, and that's what really excited me.
Yeah, there's a space for irreverence in these that's allowed, whereas a speech that is said might not make it through the audit, and the bawdiness or the playfulness and so forth, of course. And you think in modern movies how important music is, and how soundtracks have been sold as individual songs, or songs we still sing, from Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet. My goodness, so many immediate examples of this. And you show, though, how Johnson takes this song about the cut purse, warning, sort of mama, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys, right? Warning people against becoming cut purses, being sung and sold by a guy who's distracting the crowd so his friend can pickpocket the audience, and then making fun of this, having, in a Johnsonian way, taking the piss out of these people on stage, and yet promoting the ballad that there might be some authorship in there. So the irony stacked on irony.
The irony is stacked on irony, because if you come out of Johnson's play and buy the ballad that has been promoted by that play, sneakily kind of your own pocket has been a bit picked, or you've come out poorer yourself, so you are the dupe. And I think that's quite Johnsonian. And I was intrigued by how often Johnson was writing ballads, even in masques, which are such elite productions. We think of them as sort of one-off elite special court productions, but he writes a bit that gets published, and I suspect it gets published by him because he loves seeing himself in print. No. He writes a bit that gets published, that gets marketed, and that makes sense. If you're going to write a whole masque, it must be very annoying to think that it only has one outing. Of course, you're going to want to see one bit get a bit more popularity and maybe make a bit more cash.
Yeah, well, I think it may have been you that I was talking with about this. I've done so many of these now, but the gap between what we consider the elite class and common, or the citizens and whatnot, is not that big when we look at Johnson and Shakespeare. These plays, we know, were perfectly transferable to the public stage, to the court, and probably not much has changed because they had to be approved. So, and you do see that some jokes are probably received differently perhaps by one group than by the other, but they work both ways. And you made mention in your Malone book about the 18th century conception of genius, but that is genius. When you have a work that can make, it's in Midsummer Night's Dream. You pointed to Shakespeare's, well, I liked what you did with the Willow Willow song and the Desdemona song, and the gender in that. You know, it would, to know that, to be part inside, to know what's going on, that would be such a poignant moment. And it is in production, modern production, but it's so much more if that tune is part of your life and part of your consciousness. And it brings so much more meaning to see this. I was thinking about Jephthah's daughter when I was reading, because I have such a hard time teaching it, you know, because let's face it, this is not, I don't know what preachers or what parables they used in church, but it wasn't part, you know, I was a Protestant guy who grew up. Jephthah is just not one of these people, you know, we get the Samson, we get the David, we get the Moses, and of course, Jesus, whatnot. Jephthah's not somebody we get to, but there's that ballad, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah. So if I may, yes, so there were an awful lot of stories that sometimes when we need footnotes on them and we think they're obscure, there are an awful lot of stories that everyone knew, including all the illiterate, because they were in famous ballads.
Yeah.
And ballads very often tell classical stories, and ballads very often tell Bible stories.
Yeah.
And one of those ballads is the ballad of Jephthah's daughter, and how he sacrifices his virgin daughter in order to win victory. And that's essentially what the ballad is about. And various snatches of it are sung in Hamlet. And for us, it's something that needs explanation and footnote. And then you're kind of, oh, why is this being said to Polonius? Now, of course, for an audience who already know the ballad, who recognize the tune and the words, and already know, oh, it's a story about a man who sacrificed his daughter. And then there's Polonius. And this is, for them, it's foreshadowing. They're kind of, oh, no. Oh, Ophelia, oh dear. You know? So that's, and this is a different use of ballad, which we also see a lot in plays. And that's the ballad, which is a well-known ballad, not by the author necessarily, but quoted or referred to in the play, and appealing to your shared understanding of that ballad's story and that ballad's tune, so that all the audience is sort of haunted and there with those references. And as I say, for us, those are obscure, but it makes us realize that the audience had a different body of knowledge from ours, and that the ballad body of knowledge was one of the most profound ones they had, because you hear them sung. You don't have to be literate to know any ballad story. And you yourself can sing, join in the chorus without being literate. And given that all your pubs will be covered in ballads, and your house, even if you're illiterate, is likely to be decorated with ballads because of the pictures. And in fact, people would even learn to read by working through the ballads on their own walls. They'd learn to spell out things because they know what the song is. So plays that use ballads are appealing to this vast shared body of popular information. And also that kind of the popular warmth, you know, when we hear a pop song, we all know, and that puts us all in the same position. And ballads served exactly that purpose.
Yes, well, so many things pop to mind, but I do remember going to a production a few years back at the Globe, at the Modern Globe, and there was a class in there. A teacher had reserved space. I think they were groundlings, and when the line came, "Not all that glitters is gold," right? Everyone chimed in. So it's sort of that dynamic where the audience is right there with you. I can see Hamlet hamming it up. I wrote down the lines for "one fair daughter and no more, for which he loved passing well," right? And whatever the tune was, because we're not quite sure, that they'll say sung to the tune of that, you point out, or sung to, if we have that tune, we might know. But I also think too that these are moments, and I've seen it done in a couple of Branagh productions. These are moments where the person, whoever is doing the music for your production, can go in and make up a melody and, cry no more, ladies, cry no more. You can participate that way. There's an interaction between the modern stage and the old stage. So maybe not knowing the melody is helpful in that the directors, the musical directions and so forth, can interact with Shakespeare that way. All right, and with the audience.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I think it makes a difference, though, if the audience do know the tune, because then they hear it in their head, and maybe even, I wondered about things like the Desdemona Willow song, like Ophelia's songs. Will the audience in any way feel tempted to join in? Mm-hmm. You feel as though that would instinctively be wrong, but would it? Now they are inside the words of that person, being that person. It's a deep emotional attachment. And if they don't sing, but just join in their heads, that still gives them a shared moment with that character that they maybe don't have with other characters. And I'm sort of interested how often these shared songs, for instance, are sung by the women. I think this makes you identify in slightly different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I can think of popular. I'm thinking of Oasis, actually, the rock band, where they were so popular at one point that one of the brothers would just start singing the song, and the audience would take it, and he would just hold the microphone out there and let them do it. It's a shame that we. There's a lot we don't have, and that's a shame. But the fact that you have found these elements in the drama, we can bring it back. And I think it helps, and I wanted to make mention of this in introducing you, and overlooked it. It helps modern theater producers. You've worked with with several troupes on acting, and acting without direction, old pronunciation, and I think that was the Blackfriars in Staunton, Virginia, that group. So you're in the world with this, and people who are producing plays and doing these sorts of things see opportunities here to bring the audience into the production. Because otherwise, how could you make it through Act 2, Scene 2, what is traditionally Scene 2 of Act 2 in Hamlet, that enormous scene that has all of those referential things, from, children's companies, to coinage, to here and there. Oh,
yes, things are more lost than others or need more explanation than others. But I certainly think, I would be keen to work with companies on kind of how they can think about the music, not necessarily using the music from then, though it's surprising how much of it survives, but maybe using modern equivalents that have the same level of recognizability.
There is a surviving. There's a good bit of, we know some of these tunes, right?
Yes, yeah, we know quite a lot of the tunes, because what's strange about these ballads is that you get lots and lots of those big broadsheets with the pictures. They name the tune, the words, but actually there are many fewer tunes they name than there are ballads. So so very often you'd buy new words to a tune you already know. So for instance, there was a very famous tune, the most famous, which was called Fortune My Foe. And originally it was on a ballad called Fortune My Foe, which is kind of, oh no, why is the world against me? And that tune was so famous that when people were going to be hanged for being traitors, a ballad would be written in their voice saying, I did this terrible thing and it's right and correct that I'm being hanged and I'm really sorry. And it would always be to the tune of Fortune My Foe. So that became known as the hanging tune. But what is interesting is we have a ballad of Titus Andronicus telling the story of Shakespeare's play in the voice of Titus, and it is to the tune of Fortune My Foe. So now we've got the Titus story, but it also sounds like a bad luck story, and it also sounds a bit like a traitor getting his just desserts, which is an interesting take on the Titus Andronicus story. So ballads are so layered, and the tunes are themselves layered because the tunes are not new tunes. Generally, they are old, recognizable tunes. The words are new, but the tune is old. And that's why you could buy a ballad and sing it, even if you could sing it at once. You wouldn't necessarily have to learn it. You don't need your lute. And ballad tunes tend to be, and I say this as someone, I really wish I was a good singer, and I'm not nearly as good as I would like to be. And sometimes if I'm giving a talk, I really want to sing a ballad, and I just about can do it because they have a small vocal range. You know, they're for real people.
Yeah.
They're not for opera singers, you know.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, because this is done by Protestant churches, and they would bring in some cases, these kind of bawdy songs that use the melody for a hymn. Of course, its famous example of that is Gustav Holst's The Planets from Jupiter, right? The Church of England hymn, the famous, just breaking out from this kind of sort of postmodern melody into this hymn. Beautiful work. But yes, the appropriation there of the melodies for various purposes. I like it better when it ends up in the theater than in the church, because sometimes the lyrics are a little bit dry and not very inspiring, but I won't go into that too much. Well, let's think of coming back to this. I don't want to miss out on the Cambridge Elements text here with Malone. Now, this is the stuff that we'll talk about your editing work, but when you're in this world, to come across someone like Edmond Malone, I did in my early studies on Marlowe, because he put together the first edition of Marlowe's work. He found the parts and put Marlowe together again. And we can debate and argue about what belonged where and who wrote what, but he was the one who did it. And there was a copy in the Malone room in the Bodleian Library that I got to visit, had the privilege of visiting years ago. And Malone's always been close to my heart because of the effort that he made. We think of the professionalization of scholarship maybe 100 years later, but he was doing work that was it was real work. It was something you have to take seriously. And his big job was for George Stevens, right, to try to do a chronology of the plays using external and internal evidence. And it's difficult stuff. He didn't have access to the things we now have access to, and then the benefits of all of these scholars who have spent hours just tirelessly working for references. But he did pretty darn well. From what I see. His third, he changed, and he wasn't a jerk about it. He didn't insist on his and no one else's. You have those people out there.
Yeah. Yes. So Edmond Malone was an extraordinary and a deeply brilliant man who was an 18th century scholar who was inventing a lot of the disciplines that we now work in. So he kind of invented theatre history, and he invented Shakespeare's chronology, and he was trained as a lawyer. So he used his kind of forensic lawyer's mind, and he gathered rare documents and he sort of categorized them and put them in order. And as you say, he also did this for Marlowe. And so he's a brilliant, brilliant man. And he was given the task actually to write a life of Shakespeare. And he realized there isn't a ton of exciting information. It's not that easy to write a life of Shakespeare. So he thought, why don't I take Shakespeare's plays and put them in chronological order? See the first one written, the second one written, the third one written. Why don't I create that order? Because we didn't know and don't know the chronological order of the plays. And he thought, if I come up with a chronological order of the plays, that will also kind of give me Shakespeare's life, because I'll see what are the first things he wrote, the middle things, the last things. And because he was 18th century, I will see how his genius progressed. I'll see how he became a genius, and I'll work my way. And so he came up with the chronology, and then, because he's a very good scholar, he rethought it, came up with a better one as he got more information, and then he came up with a third one, which was published posthumously. And those chronologies, he's often traduced, he's often treated poorly by scholars who look at his first chronology and go, oh, look how laughably wrong this is. Mm-hmm. But his third chronology is very similar to our own. And so he more or less created our chronology. And he also created
you have it here.
Yes.
I don't know if you can see it, but in the book, let me get the camera right here.
Yeah.
And I just was hypnotized by this, and I was looking at the third one. I'm going, okay, I don't have this in my head, but this looks pretty accurate.
Well, it depends whether it's accurate. I mean, that would depend on whether our chronology now is accurate.
Yeah, and that's the point you're making.
My argument in the book is the brilliant Malone created roughly our chronology, and we've roughly stuck to it. But I was also saying, are his methods actually right? Yeah. I think some don't work together. And what I ended up concluding, and it's one of those annoying books, it would be really great if I could conclude going, so here's the actual chronology, I've solved it. But no, what I conclude is Malone's not as right as we thought, and we are not as right as we thought. And our chronology is more open to question than we'd thought, but I can't tell you the solution.
Very familiar with the closing of your book. And I thought, well, it's just the truth, Tiffany. It's just the truth. The number of times we have all been foiled when we're trying to write on Shakespeare, and we want to date the play. You would love to have a performance of Midsummer Night's Dream on record in front of Queen Elizabeth. I don't think we have one. I think it's much later to make the argument that, the flexibility. And we wish that the Office of the Revels had been, those records had been as exact as they were in the 90s. As they were before the 90s, the 1590s when Shakespeare was active. But there's a lot we just don't know.
There's a lot we don't know. And I think where we get muddled is every now and then. So there's one thing which is dating the work, like when did Shakespeare write Twelfth Night? And we've got reason to think there's a kind of, that there's a 1602 performance. So we know that it exists by then. Yeah. But then we've got a text of Twelfth Night. There's only one. It's in the Folio of 1623. And so when does that text date? It's a different question from when did Shakespeare first write Twelfth Night? And we tend to bang those two together. So we tend to go Twelfth Night is 1602 and this text is 1602. But if you look at the text of Twelfth Night, it has all kinds of hallmarks of being quite a late Shakespeare play, which is what Malone originally thought. And its hallmark, it's got a lot of song, which is associated usually with Blackfriars Theatre, which the company went to after 1608-9. So and so I think things that we are muddled about and don't realize are that we have muddled together the texts we have and a text now lost that Shakespeare wrote at one point of time. But also, when you actually ask the chronological question, I think Malone was asking the wrong question, and we are. Because the question, when did Shakespeare write this play, is not an answerable question because you don't write a play in a day. And the problem with the question, when did Shakespeare write this play, is, do we mean when did he take an empty piece of paper and pick up a quill and write the? Or do we mean when he wrote Finis at the end, which could be that same month, but in principle could be 5 years later? He could have written and revised and rethought, and in between written another play and so forth. So and in fact, if he's simultaneously writing two plays, so there are all kinds of questions that are wrong there are all kinds of things that are wrong with the question, when did Shakespeare write this play? Particularly, and if he revised the play, well, is that the date then when he finally finished? So when did he start? When did he finish? And a much better question is, in which order were these plays first performed?
Mm-hmm.
Because although it's no easier to answer, it is a real question. There will be an order. Mm-hmm. Whereas the order in which he wrote the play, it's not a clear question. It's not clear what that means. And as I say, it's very usual for a Shakespeare play to have definite early signs in it and definite later signs in it, showing that that play has been rethought, often by him, and sometimes by other people. And it has a really sliding date of what it is.
Mm-hmm. It does. And you can see differences between quarto versions and folio versions. I've seen 2 or 3 or 4 places right off the top of my head where I'm thinking, the reason that isn't there is because it was no longer topical. Yeah. The character of Philostrate or Philostrate in Midsummer Night's Dream is in the earlier quarto, but I think that was a joke on Tilney, and that joke had vanished 20 years later, so it makes sense. And who among us, when we are trying to publish a little article, right, when we get these corrected, you get edited, and then you get edited, and sometimes the editors come back and say, listen, this you got to stop, right? I think F. Scott Fitzgerald was absolutely he would get the galleys at a time when the galleys were not digitized at all, and he would start rewriting the galleys, and the publisher would just yank the book from him. Authorship is never over, and I've never talked to the author of anything who said, okay, that was perfect, that was precisely what I wanted to say. You always look back, right? So you put this into the area of dramatic performance, where a laugh pops up one night and you go, we can push this over here, or we need to take that out. That joke wasn't funny, right? They're testing material in front of real audiences. So of course it's a process. And we're saying that we have that Shakespeare is the writer of all of this, the main guy, but there's a lot of stuff being collaborated around these texts and this great dramatic poetry.
Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration there, and I think we've got quite obsessed with authorial collaboration, what other authors wrote with Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. But I actually also suspect that of being sometimes the wrong question, because a lot of Shakespeare texts where they really change, between quarto and folio, for instance, a lot of the changes are very specifically around musical bits. Songs come and some songs go. The Willow Song is in one version of Othello, but not in the other. A lot of disturbances around music. And I came to think that a lot of the revision is you give the text to the music person, who after Shakespeare was John Wilson. And John Wilson does revisions around music because he's revamping the music. And I think in the folio, you can see quite a lot of John Wilson revisions, which, because we've never asked, has a composer done the revisions? So we've never answered. You answer the questions you ask. So if you say, which other playwright made these revisions, then you search for other playwrights and then you come up with other playwrights. But if you change the question, you get a different answer. So I think something else I was floating in that book was whether, in terms of chronology, we've also sometimes maybe been asking the wrong questions, and you can't get the right answer if your question is wrong. I don't want to push that too far. I don't want to get into fights with the authorship people because they're really mean, but across
the board,
yes. But with respect, I think sometimes the wrong questions have been pursued.
Yeah, I spoke with a student not long ago, an undergrad, who wanted to write a thesis. We have a senior or a fourth-year thesis, and she wanted to go into Shakespeare's view of women. And I said, we were off to a bad start. Authorial intention. And it took about 20 minutes for me to explain that. But the thing is, I always just get kind of reactive to this whole notion of authorial intention, particularly in Shakespeare and any dramatist. A modern dramatist, is David Mamet, is he a capitalist or is he socialist? Can we tell from Glenn Ross what he is? These are questions that are not necessary for us now. And I'm not sure if we're that interested in exactly when Charles Dickens sat down to write something. And he's a perfectly famous writer, Ernest Hemingway or anyone. But it seems to be an obsession in Shakespeare. And it might be the paucity of the biography, the lack of, which is everybody, there are gaps in everybody's life, really, unless you're the Queen, I guess, but somebody that was deemed important. This is segueing in very nicely into editing, and I kind of want to use a Tiffany Stern image here of the weaving. So we're free to move fluidly here, but on all of these topics. But you're very, very involved in projects that could what's the old could find a person mad or leave them so. Trying to make in terms of textual editing, because that involves the collation of very many, of all editions and so forth. You're doing this work for Norton, and you're doing this work for you're doing the Arden, and I wanted to the Arden really is the first one you wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
And let's bring us up to date a bit on what's going on over there.
Okay, so with Peter Holland and Zachary Lesser, the three of us are general editors of Arden Shakespeare, the fourth iteration. So there's been Arden 1, Arden 2, Arden 3. Now we are general editing Arden 4, but we have different individual editors for each of our volumes. And we're at the exciting moment now where some texts have been completed and they're just being sent in, and we're having the delight and thrill and fear and everything else of going through those and checking through those, so that I think we're hoping that Arden 4 will be launched next year with any luck. We don't want to launch with one volume, we want to launch with maybe 3 or 4. So, but that seems in sight. And this will be a rethinking of Shakespeare again in the Arden formula, which, as you'll probably know, is quite scholarly, quite footnotey. But there are a couple of things we're going to do that one is we're thinking very much, we're asking editors to think about the concerns of now. And so to edit, to edit wisely and robustly and thoughtfully, but, issues of race, Me Too issues, these are very current, and our additions and our notes must think through those things in ways that haven't been thought through before. So, for instance, there's a word casually used in Shakespeare a lot, fair, meaning beautiful. But of course, fair also assumes a form of beauty that is blonde. So, we don't want people to go overboard, but it's important to bear in mind certain subtexts that we haven't really thought about before. So these are going to be additions, thinking through issues of now as well as new issues of then, thinking through new ways of editing that have kind of emerged over the past few years. But also, I think we're also going to publish a kind of big full Ardens, and then online it will be possible to have an Arden with glosses and more simple notes. So if you don't want the big full thing, you can have a briefer version, so which might be more teachable, depending. So we're having a kind of double Arden also.
Okay, so the online version would have fewer notes or no notes at all?
No, it would have all the notes, but you would be able to flick and go, I just really want glosses, or so that
Gotcha.
so that the idea is, if you want the full Arden experience, it is there.
Yeah.
But I think what is the case is, if you look at an Arden, sometimes you've got 2 lines of text and all the rest is note. And that that is brilliant for one kind of person, and for another kind of person, it's a bit off-putting.
Yes.
So we want you to be able to toggle through those experiences. Also online, we're going to Arden was going to have a stronger digital, and it will be kind of born digital, but also simultaneously in print. But it will digitally, it does mean that every now and then you can gloss a word with a picture. Yeah. Rather than with words. You can gloss a sound with the sound. The trouble is you can't print that out. So we're still working out the sort of to and fro between digital and print. There was a world in which we were going to be fully digital, but that was a world that didn't come into being. We had thought that maybe the future would be a digital one, and people wouldn't be so physical book focused. Students wouldn't be. But thank goodness they are. They still like Shakespeare in books. So we will continue to put Shakespeare in books.
Yeah, the death of the book has been greatly exaggerated.
Yes, indeed. I'm thrilled to say.
My students, you still feel comfortable. Of course, expensive books are another thing. But the thing is, I believe it's 2 years ago. Yes, I was speaking with you, and you were talking about you don't need to construct a museum around these texts. And I thought a lot about that after speaking with you. And I'm thinking, if you need to find out something about the year 1601, February and whatnot, it's online. You can get a lot of this information, meanings of words and so forth, are already there. So have that, and yet you do want something to be accompany the text, to be part of that. And I think that this sounds like a perfect approach, that you can have both, and why not?
Yeah,
and I don't mind 2 lines with the annotations, because I like to annotate. I like it on the same page. I don't like looking back in the back and trying to figure out which number. And there's so many like that.
Yeah, no, that's really important, having it on the page. And the other thing I will say as a general editor is, what's very good about still having the page, because we weren't sure at one stage whether we would, but because we are definitely editing for the page, what's good is that actually forces a limit on the length of a note, because a note cannot be longer than a page. There has to be some Shakespeare text. And, and some editors are brilliantly precise, and some editors are brilliantly prolix. Okay, so, and, so it's helpful having these things that circumscribe what people do.
Well, you have all of these people out there, and I could be one of them, but I'm not. But I mean, I could be, because I've looked at these notes in several editions, Arden editions, and I thought that's going on a little bit longer, than me. And then I've also thought, wait a second, now I'm going to have to look up this or that, because I'm not quite sure if this is accurate or whatnot. And you have these people who can come in afterwards and be critical of one thing or another thing, which would be the cause of some anxiety. And so if anybody's out there listening, just try it yourself and see if you can do a perfect edition that will satisfy everyone. I've for years loved the Arden's approach as a teacher, and boy, did I like their approach over the pandemic. They kept things moving, and just amazing to me.
Yeah, I mean, if I may say another thing about Arden's, which will make them different maybe from other series, is that quite often a series, and it sort of relates back to the Malone thing, quite often a series comes up with a moment that you're to edit too. So in the old days, people would often say, edit in order to create the manuscript that Shakespeare gave to the company before it was soiled with performance.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the kind of 80s onwards, people have been saying, edit to the first performance. Now, all of these are these are just mental constructs.
Mm-hmm.
But we in Arden are saying, work out what you think the text or texts is. What moments do you think do you think you've got a prompt book? Do you think you've got an author's text? Do you think you've got a later revision? What do you think that text is?
Mm-hmm.
Decision 1. And now, what do you want to edit to? Decision 2. And you can edit to any moment that's early modern. So
Mm-hmm.
do you want to edit to a public theatre performance at the Globe? Or do you want to edit to the Boxing Day performance at court?
Mm-hmm.
So we're asking the editors both to work out what their texts are and what they're going to edit them to. That will help them shape the notes. And that will also mean that Arden does not have quite the uniformity of another complete works, but instead each edition is really, really owned by its editor, and its editor will have picked the moment for that text. And again, we cannot be accurate. I'm editing The Tempest, and I'm editing it to the wedding performances at court for the Palatine wedding. And I cannot accurately do that. I can't know, but we can't accurately edit to any moment. But at least having a focus both gives us things to think about. And like for me, it allows me to think through other things that went on at the wedding and how they might have interacted with the Tempest, colours that were being worn at the wedding, and so forth. And I think I hope this means that every editor has particular ownership of their text. And also I hope that will be teachable, reminding people that the texts, were performed at moments in time, and they will have been different according to the different moment, and allowing that to shape the editor's thought.
Yeah, that's a brilliant approach. But
Tricky.
Hamlet is a bear. Hamlet, it's just so.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much.
There are 3 rival texts for it, so yes.
Yeah,
yes.
And there's so much I want from the second quarto that is not in the folio. I like Horatio's earlier speech. And speaking of promoting other things, the references to Julius Caesar in there, which are pretty famous now among editors, but you can just see a revival coming or something of that nature, or an inside joke, that Polonius played Caesar, actually did play Caesar, whatnot.
Yes, there are 2 explanations for the references for Julius Caesar in the Quarto 2. And one is that Shakespeare is writing both the plays Hamlet and Julius Caesar at the same time, and there's kind of bleed through. But another is indeed, and I sort of favor this now, I'm more conscious of just how thoughtful the theatre was about marketing, is that Shakespeare is in one play advertising another play. Did you like this play with ghosts? Because there are ghosts also in Julius Caesar. And then maybe that's why that gets removed in the folio text, because they're no longer in performance back to back. And so, that maybe one has rotated out. So I certainly am interested in those things.
Yeah, you wonder too how the source text, Plutarch, there might be more distance between the English translations. I haven't cross-referenced that and looked at that. That might be some, but it's Julius Caesar's no longer attached to Hamlet in the same way in 1623, and Midsummer Night's Dream isn't attached to Romeo and Juliet through the Pyramus and Thisbe story. And it's not quite the same, is it? There are things that you would automatically, if you were editing a text after the playwright's death, right, and you had the freedom to do that, nobody's going to stop you. And I believe Mr. Fletcher is out there, and a younger, and he's quite capable. But also there are others, there are actors who are deeply involved in the production, but I see a broader community forming around this production, and I'd like to think in complete earnest. Let's do the best, basically the same as your group at the Arden. Let's do the best possible job. This is a river and the water flows, but we have to pick a place in time here to do this thing. Brilliant. Well, are there any other additions that you mentioned Norton?
Norton is a different thing. I've been doing this is with Stephen Greenblatt, and I've been redoing the 16th century literature anthology.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that has been tricky in all sorts of different ways, because there already is a brilliant 16th century anthology, mm-hmm. but anthologies, like editions, represent their times. Mm-hmm. And, this anthology that exists is quite courtly and quite male, lots of Petrarchan verse. And I think it was felt that they wanted some other voices in there as well. But actually, in the 16th century, it's not that easy to find a ton of, say, women's voices, but I found some more women's voices, some voices of trade. I got a gravestone in there. I just tried to get other things in there so that we could hear what was happening as well as the gentleman writing courtly poetry. Mm. And so it's a slightly frenetic volume now, and I hope it works. It's hard to know, but we ended up putting in a commonplace book, and of course, an early modern commonplace book, you'd come up with themes like anger and bawdy and love, and you'd put poems or prose under those themes. And so I came up with some themes that just got some issues that weren't otherwise dealt with in the volume, and put poems or bits of prose that would match some of those into the commonplace book. And I hope that's just given a slightly different feel to the volume, but we shall see. That also, I think, should be out next year.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, just to clarify, the Arden editorial work is on the plays of Shakespeare.
Of Shakespeare, yes.
The Norton work
Norton is on 16th century literature.
16th century literature, and we know in our schooling, we remember the names of various anthologies. Yeah. I love anthologies. Now, some people have criticized them. We don't go to an individual writer and, discover that writer on their own turf. But as a portal, as an opening, as a way to browse, they mean so much. And thinking back in my educational training, they give you a feeling, at least, that you have some grip on the time and place and the literature, the literary styles, and so forth.
Yes, an anthology is like a carefully curated portal, indeed. So it's and it's just a great starting place. It's not the ending place, but it gives you a chosen selection that makes logical sense, that is glossed and noted so that to help you understand it. So it's just a brilliant, exciting way to work out which bits interest you, and then if you want to follow through, you can take a specific author or a specific theme and run with it yourself, but it has been introduced to you by the anthology. And anthologies are themselves interesting because the Norton is quite big and quite heavy, and you've got to think about, do students it would be hard to carry more than one of those around, maybe students don't want to carry them in the same way, so you're kind of, can we make it a bit shorter so that it's slightly lighter? But all these are kind of, it's interesting, the questions, the things one ends up discussing about anthologies, which is different from discussions about the complete works of Shakespeare. But anyway, yes, but that's another thing I've been doing. And I guess the other big thing I've been thinking about because of this anniversary is I've been thinking about the first folio, and are
Let's
there?
talk about the first folio, and because we've had several first folio people in this year, this anniversary year.
Yes.
On the
Yeah, there's a lot of great work.
And there's a lot to talk about, and you take a position on the first folio that is unique. So let's roll with that. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, lots of Shakespeareans for this year were asked to come up with a folio talk, of course, you know, and maybe there were tiny territory battles. And so I was kind of, I don't want to be in any of those battles. Let me, what hasn't been looked at before, you know, what can I, and I was really inspired by Malone, George Stevens, the 18th century scholars, because they had looked carefully and with kind of fresh, different eyes. And I was sort of inspired by them, and they looked not with reverence, but they were kind of error spotting. And I suppose a little bit I got error spotting from them. And so the things I came to be interested in about the folio are, I was kind of, okay, the preliminary matter, the way the folio starts, the picture of Shakespeare, the interspersed preliminary matter in a very odd order, that's a different odd order depending on folio, for commendatory poems and a catalogue and a list of actors, but they're weirdly interspersed, not in a logical order. And I was looking at I was looking at that, and amongst my questions were, why is Shakespeare's picture so awful? And why are there so few commendatory poems, and why are they in a strange order? And I started to realize the preliminary matter has gone quite wrong. And I think there's a practical reason for this. And it's that, you know, the printing house, it took over a year to print the folio. And all the time you're printing that, money isn't coming in. You're not going to get money from it until you can sell it. So they stop every now and then to print some other things just to keep going. But basically they're getting poorer and poorer and more frantic. And they need that book out. And the bit we read first, the preliminary matter, is the bit that's printed very near the end after you've done the rest of the page, the plays, with the exception of one play that came in late. But I think that preliminary matter is at a moment when they're really low on money. They get a terrible apprentice who doesn't know how to draw yet to do Shakespeare's picture. They get only 2 preliminary poems, you can tell from the page order, and then they scrabble around to get 2 more. They've only got 4 poems saying Shakespeare's good, and only Ben Jonson of those poets even clearly knew him. Yeah. So actually, and you know, I think all this year people have been talking about the great reverence for the book and the wonderful book, and of course it's spectacular. It's how we have 18 plays of Shakespeare that we wouldn't otherwise have. But being tremendous is not the same as being good. And this is a book that starts really haphazardly and badly, and in ways that an early modern reader would have seen, like, why does the picture not have a picture frame? Why does the folio start with a poem by Ben Jonson rather than start with Shakespeare? You know, how come? And you know, I think this is a poem that's meant to be under the picture, and for various reasons had to be shifted. So for me, it's been interesting to think about problems in the folio, not in a spirit of meanness, but just trying to work out, have we admired this book too much to see what's there anymore, and what happens if we look?
Yeah. Point taken. And they're so valuable now that probably there are probably people in the world of commerce who wouldn't want to hear much about this. But
I mean,
it's true.
Value and worth. You know. Yes.
Yeah. The monument. There's just a lot of things. Well, you know, there's a lot of evidence, really, when you see that the Bodleian sort of They weren't really interested in it and didn't acquire it until later. Wanted a later
Well,
folio, which I guess.
but what they did was they had a first folio, but when they got a second folio, they were kind of, okay, we've got the better one now, so we get rid of the first
Get
one.
rid of the first.
That's
Oh no!
but to us, we're sort of, oh my God, and then they had to buy it back years later
At a much higher price.
at a much higher price. But for then, the logic of then, the improved reprint print with fewer typos is going to be better than the earlier errant one. They didn't know we were going to treat that book like a holy relic. It was a book. Its contents were important, but the book wasn't. And that's, now we treat it like a religious icon. And I think that is fascinating also.
Yeah. Well, it did what it did, and
It is an important thing.
You and I and people watching here are the better for it.
We are indeed.
A playwright with half the plays probably wouldn't
Yeah.
wouldn't
Yes,
quite
indeed.
draw. It had to be Shakespeare and somebody else, maybe several other people, which is another point. And I think you have spoken to this too, that you're in with Shakespeare. I know that your focus and your editing and so forth, but this is a Shakespeare in the world in 16th and late 16th, early 17th century London, but also in a community of writers, of playwrights, and sometimes vicious, very competitive, and yes, they're working a commercial enterprise and so forth. And the image of Shakespeare, and Folio is part of this, does tend to draw, put this big shadow even on the 16th century literature that we aforementioned. And it's good for us to peek around and look at all of the other things going on here. Yeah.
Oh yes. Yeah, the person we've back created onto Shakespeare is very post 18th century, and I do love. I'm very fascinated in then. I'm really fascinated in how plays were performed and how they were put on and how they were printed and who they were marketed to and who did the performing and who did the printing and where did Shakespeare write and who did he hang out with, and I think sometimes we forget to ask the questions of then because we've got a very confirmed Shakespeare in our mind who's a Shakespeare of somewhere between Romanticism and now.
Yeah, and Shakespeare school.
Yes,
and that's led Shakespeare down some muddy paths, in people's minds, and having probably more to do with the teacher and the system they were in than with the playwright. I do remember thinking, oh my goodness, Shakespeare, there's no way, I'm 16, 17 years old. There's just no way. This is going to be too much for me. And we got the Kent cursing Oswald. Okay. Okay, I get it. There's some good stuff in here. So we all like get through our own ways. You have spent your entire career, though. You were first at Oxford, then at Cambridge, and then back. You made your way back to Oxford, and then now you're at the Shakespeare Institute, and in Stratford, where you live. Yeah, and so. Yes. That is just a wonderful journey through, and the whole time with Shakespeare. I'm in Japan, and I have been and am continuing to write on Shakespeare. How do you solve this enormous linguistic problem that you have, the gaps between languages, and particularly East Asian languages, and Shakespeare. I've spoken with Soichiro Kawai of University of Tokyo, and he says it can be done, and I've seen his work, and I think he's right. And so you're very local, dealing with this enormous global figure. And you're in so many different areas. I don't know where you find the time. I just don't know.
Well, I think it's the current job, which is the Shakespeare Institute is a graduate school of the University of Birmingham, but located in Stratford. And I think it's helpful and wonderful that I have brilliant students, and they are all working in the area I'm also working in. So it's a very inspirational, and I have wonderful colleagues as well. So it's inspirational to work at the Shakespeare Institute, and that helps. That's always putting new ideas my way, and new fabulous students my way. So I think that has helped, and that has maybe given me lots of different lines, different ways into Shakespeare. And it was wonderful teaching at Oxford, and being a professor there. When you're at Oxford, you teach 16th to 18th century, and you teach as a generalist. Mm-hmm. And I think that gave me the most brilliant grounding. And again, I had spectacular students. Mm-hmm. But possibly as I myself became more and more focused, it was quite nice to get a job where everyone was also focused on the Renaissance. I think I am lucky in my job.
Yeah, and there's the occasional performance in town too.
And the RSC performances, of course. Yes. And there's always the hope, the dream. I live on the Welcome Hills, near where Shakespeare owned sheep, and I suppose I'm always hoping that, I wonder if did he stroll through my garden? It's nice for me to dream this.
Yeah, probably so. It's not that big.
It's not that big. Yes.
Probably so. I have a couple of stories. I won't relate. Well, I'll relate one. I remember there used to be, we were at a B&B. We were watching we stayed, I was in my schooling, my undergraduate schooling, and we got to do a bit at the University of London, and then study in Stratford for a month and get to see the entire repertoire, and including a young Patrick Stewart, a younger Patrick Stewart, and Jonathan Pryce and Glenda Jackson. Their names, I could go on and on. There was just these brilliant names. But I was out for a walk, and I kept seeing this sign to Snitterfield. And I thought, I want to go to Snitterfield. This sounds like, and I walked down this path and it just disappeared. And all of a sudden, these large sheep are looking at me, just standing there looking at me. And I'm saying, well, what are you guys looking at? And am I on the right path, or I'm lost? And I turned around, and there was this farmer, and he was carrying a shotgun. And I said, "Oh, sir, I suppose that you're wondering why an American is out here talking to your sheep. I think I'll just go back home." He said, "That's fine." He was very friendly. But I just, those stories of Stratford. Now, why am I talking about this? It seems to me that when we are trying to relate to Shakespeare, and we have all of this 18th and 19th century, the Victorian, the glossing over, the icon, and the bardolatry and so forth, that we tend to forget that he's from this small town and wandered around and had those same experiences. Maybe I walked down the same path as Shakespeare did. Maybe he had a conversation with the sheep too. Why are you looking at me like that? Are you guys going to charge me or what? So just wonderful. Tiffany, let's see, is there anything else? I think we've covered everything.
Those are the key ones for
the key things. I still have
another time I'd like to talk to you about Tarleton the clown, but not now. I'm going to turn to him next.
You can come on anytime you want to. You are always welcome. And I just get excited. I get kind of nervous, but with guests that I've met before, not nervous. And with Tiffany Stern, I feel that our interest overlaps so much that it's just going to be a joy. And it was a joy to talk with you. I'll let you, this is your morning, my afternoon. And I'm a little bit late for supper, but it's all pre-planned. What I'd like to do is ask you to stay for a moment after we finish recording and chat for just a moment and debrief a bit. But I wanted to thank you on my behalf, but also on behalf of all the members of our audience. You have a lot of followers out there from our prior talk, and I'm sure even more this time around. and you can come back anytime when you let me know, and I'll keep an eye out and invite you. And I hope we can keep this thing going for a while now, so we can.
I hope so. It's a marvelous thing. Yeah. So, and thank you for setting it up.
Yeah, I kind of wish. Well, it happened. It happened when it happened, but it would have been wonderful when we were younger to have all this technology, to have been doing this, because I think it's a good way to introduce people to the world. And sometimes it works to help diffuse some of these sectarian battles that kind of pop up, and remind us that we're all part of the same community, and we have to stick together. There are plenty of outside forces after us. We don't need to be after each other.
Yes, it's. I have a moment in the Malone book where I say roughly that kind of. Let's not. We're trying to protect humanities. Let's not tear one another apart.
Oh,
but weirdly, I did say as a woman that kind of, there are particular male groups that are quite aggressive, subgroups within the editing world, and kind of let's all be nice to one another. And two male reviewers of the book told me to take that bit out. So I sort of, oh dear. I did not, of course.
There's some other stories out there involving male, female, and yeah, I know the types. I remember them well, and yes, not.
But let's not end on this note. Let's
not end on this note, because there's so many people out there who have done such fine work. And yes. We're talking about people who are brilliant like you, who could have done other things. You could have followed other paths and taken whatever academic achievements that you've done and whatnot. And we decided to do this. And the road was not always smooth and well paved. It's a rough road, no matter where you are. And but we're so happy that you could join us here. My Japanese colleagues are going to be thrilled, but we have an international audience, and everybody's welcome to come in and participate. So thank you so much, and I hope we can talk. We can talk with you again soon.
I would love that. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me.
Bye-bye.